Well, thanks. It's nice to be out with you tonight. I appreciate the attendance. I'm really not that good a speaker, so I hope you enjoy the next few minutes. And as I've been thinking about this over the last few days, there's so many different ways to go with this. Annabelle sent over a list of about 16 questions that range from what's the history of UNF and why'd you want to become president? What's the difference between a good college, great college? Will UNF have a football team? And what are you going to do about parking? So they're kind of varied in terms of the approach, and so I'm going to kind of split this into a couple pieces, and then it probably will be as healthy as anything to do questions, and because that way we'll make sure we touch some of the areas you're interested in, as opposed to me trying to speculate what you may want to be inquisitive about. And actually, the first question on the list is really not a bad place to start, what is the history of UNF? And I found that the best way to talk about this when I go and speak at a Rotary Club or places where we're trying to raise money from people is to try to give it, circle in on what kind of a university is UNF. And the Carnegie Foundation used to have a classification system that essentially went this way. I've kind of converted it for layman's terms, but essentially it was this way. Is that there's essentially three types of schools in the country, not in any particular order. One of them would be a research-intensive university. At a research-intensive university, faculty may teach no classes. They may teach one, maybe two a year, and the rest of their time they're spent engaged in intense research activity in a lab, an archaeological dig, in a library, writing a history, analyzing polls, if they're political scientists, those kinds of things. And so you still get taught there, but there's a heavy, intensive research product. University of Florida, 70 miles away, is a research-intensive university. They do about $500 million, $500 million worth of funded research, where some entity somewhere, primarily the federal government, says, we will pay you to work on this type of research activity. The original type really was focused on the teaching mission. All faculty teach and research, but it's a question of where that needle is tilted. And if you think of the sort of the small private colleges, a couple thousand students, 50 to 100 faculty maybe, 40 to 100 faculty. And their faculty, they'll also research, but they may teach 8 or 10 classes per year. So obviously they have less time to engage in that heavy research activity. And you go there to get that classic liberal arts education. There may be a few professional schools like a business or nursing or a law school attached to those institutions, but primarily the focus there is on the teaching, is focused on teaching. And Washington and Lee would be an example of that. Swanee, Jacksonville University would be an example of that. Stetson, Rollins. And after World War II, a third type emerged. The GIs, millions of soldiers came back from Europe and from Southeast Asia, and they said, look, we're placemen. We live in the metropolitan areas, and the state schools with the cheaper tuition, they're the land-grant universities in Gainesville, or they're over in Tallahassee. And the bulk of the population lives in Jacksonville, Orlando, Tampa, Miami. And so we think we need a public university in the metropolitan areas. And they became known as regional universities, and in academic circles are often called comprehensive universities. And the reason for comprehensive is you can major in just about anything. You'll have the liberal arts and sciences, you'll have a smattering of professional schools. The model looks just like UNF, with a business school and a college of health and a college of education to train teachers. And then we've got computing and engineering and construction in one college. Looks almost exactly like this. Typically won't have a med school, typically won't have a law school, typically won't have a veterinary school, but pretty much if you wanted to stay in town, you could do what you really needed to do. Well, these schools in Florida opened up in the 60s and 70s, primarily 50s, 60s, and 70s. And Jacksonville was late to the game for that. UNF opened in 1972. And it opened originally as upper division only, juniors and seniors and grad school. And then in the mid-'80s, we added freshmen and sophomores and kind of became a full-fledged comprehensive university. So a little side footnote here. It's about 150, 160 colleges in the state of Florida. Some are technical colleges, community colleges, public, private, et cetera. And right now in the state, we're somewhere between 3rd to 5th on the entering SAT score for freshmen and their high school GPAs out of all of those schools. We didn't even have freshmen 27, 28 years ago. So we've gone from last to first, or last to the top couple in that ensuing time. So those of you that came here last year, came here say in the fall, It's the hardest to ever get into the University of North Florida. It's the smartest group of students that we've ever had came in the fall of 2011. In fall of 2012, it's even going to be higher, is the way that's looking at this point in time. So many of the universities in Florida, Tampa, University of Central Florida in Orlando, FIU in Miami, FAU in the Lauderdale area, Palm Beach area, they've decided that they want to focus far more on their research mission. And that's fine. We need more scientists, and we need more discoveries, and we need more analysis of plays and movies and history, et cetera. That's healthy. But there's a trade-off that goes on. And any of you that are students that have friends at some of those big schools probably know what that is. My niece went to the same school that I went to, and I had my economics professor was in a class of 40, and invited him over to our fraternity house. Once a month we would have a faculty member, invite him over to give a talk at dinner, and we'd put ties on, and they were always good too. Well, she had him in a class of 2,300 and never met him. And that's the trade-off. If your faculty go from teaching 6 or 8 or 10 classes down to none or one, if you don't have the resources to hire 6 or 8 or 10 more faculty members, the classes balloon up. And what we've decided is that although our research activity kind of bounces around, a little bit more would be good. We encourage it. It's required for faculty, obviously, to be tenured. But what we find that we're really good at is that teaching mission. By and large, the faculty members are going to know the students in their classes, and there's an intimacy about that we think is very important in the learning process. And there's a school for everybody. UCF is on its way to 100,000 students. I think you'd feel like a number if you're there, but for some students that's particularly going to work. But this is kind of the old school traditional teach and learn. And one of the ways a professor was here in the business college that I'd gotten to know. And he was kind of a quirky guy, to be honest. I haven't seen him in a number of years. I don't know if he's retired or not, but he was a little bit quirky. And a friend of mine at the beach was getting an MBA and taking a class with him. And it's one of my first years here. I said, well, what's he like? How is he? And he says, oh, he's a little quirky. He says, but he's really good. And he said, we were going over something in the class, and he stopped, and he said, I can see from your faces and your body language that you don't get this. And this is one of the most important things in this class, and we're going to make sure you get it before we move on. So the next couple classes, this is what we're going to focus on. And that's really hard to do online, or really hard to do in a class of 3,000 or 4,000. And so what's sort of the outputs? What is the end game? Well, our students do very well on majors where there's a licensure exam. They do very well on what's critical thinking. We just started to do a test. People come their freshman year and then their senior year to see how much value has been added. And we're among the tops in the country in terms of how much has been added during those particular 4 years. And now, a lot of times when I'll meet with current students, they'll be grumbling about faculty members. I've yet to meet an alum that doesn't say great things about the university. So when you get out of here, you'll look back and reflect and say, okay, maybe that was better than I thought at that particular time. But the TLOs, the transformational learning opportunities, the flagshipping programs, these are things that are unique at UNF that we think really separates it, makes a better place to go and to learn for most students. About half of the students here come from the Northeast Florida area, the surrounding counties, but most all stay. Most all of those that come from outside stay. And a lot of that is because we're able to line up internships, there's job connections, it's a good place to live. Many of you will have a lot of different reasons why you selected to come to UNF. It may have been a particular major, it may have been you like the beauty of the campus. I think it's the prettiest campus in the state of Florida, and I've been on almost all of them. It may be, I hear this one a lot, I didn't realize this, but we're apparently the campus that's the closest to the beach on the entire east coast of Florida. That pops up in a lot of different places, and the downtown, and it may be that you lived here already and didn't really want to move away. But I think what we've got here is a wonderful, wonderful product that the faculty do a tremendous job of really trying to engage in students and connect. You all, I know, noticed that we had the Republican presidential debate here last week, and my wife called me up the middle of Thursday, and she said, John, Wolf Blitzer was on the radio today, and she said they kept asking him questions, and he kept coming back to UNF. He goes, he says, look, this is the prettiest campus I've ever been on. He says, I'm surprised I haven't heard about it. I've heard about Florida and Florida State. He says, this is just incredible. He says, I walked around, it was just gorgeous. I bumped into students, they're bright, they're engaged, they're witty, they're clever. I went and ate at the student union on Wednesday night before the debate, and he said, sat down with some students, I had a wonderful time. He says, people really ought to look at this place. And I met him right before the debate, and he went into a rant again about it. He says, you got to spend more money on marketing. We need more people to know about this. And then, of course, CNN the next day, and then on the next night, Erin Burnett program, she goes through talking about the city and talking about the airport, but also talking about the university. And often we don't appreciate the kind of a gem that we have. Now, the next question is also a good one. How do you go from good to great? And those of you that are in business probably have heard of that book, Good to Great. And it's one that I think is a great format to use, thinking even about your life, much less about your career or about a business. And he begins that book by saying, good is the enemy of great. And that's why very few companies truly become great. And what he's done is he's taken a look at a series of companies that are in the same business and tracked them over a 10-year period. One of them took off and some of them disappeared. And he was explaining that contrast. He subsequently come up with another book because some of those that did great went and tanked. And he's trying to figure out, okay, all of my data and things I concluded about consistent themes among these companies that took off, what did I miss on the go-around? And it's really, to me, a pretty fascinating book. And in many ways, it starts with, he's got a different form, but a form of an exercise that I started using about 15 years ago. And I call it the utopia exercise, which is, let's take a look at a problem, or we'll take a look at a university, or we'll take a look at a city and say, okay, take a look at a department, poli-sci department. Okay, in a perfect world, what would this department look like? How many faculty? What would they be paid? How many scholarships? What would the student to faculty ratio be? What would the class size be? What would our equipment be? Our library? What would that perfect one be? And then let's see how much money that's going to take, what kind of a timeline. Let's map that out to say, where are we going to go? And so it requires a lot of benchmarking or measures or metrics. And so we've pulled together all kinds of these things, and then we've gone and we've compared ourselves to 10 institutions outside of Florida and 10 in Florida. And it's on what we spend on the library, it's the amount of scholarship dollars per student, the amount of money spent per student, number of faculty, number of full-time faculty, all kinds of different measures to do the contrast. And the theory then is to develop a plan over time to get ahead. Now, my utopia exercise always had 4 rules. The fourth isn't really relevant right now, but the first is you've got all the money you're going to need. Because if you say, well, I'm not going to have that money, I'll never get that money, well, then you're not dreaming big enough. It allows you to say, let's pretend I can get the money, not, $1 trillion, but something big. What are we going to shoot for? Secondly, nobody is going to oppose it. Somebody always says, well, Alice down in legal isn't going to let us do that. Well, let's just pretend everybody's going to be okay with this idea. The third is you can change any law or rule or regulation. And a lot of times that one inhibits people's thinking, that especially if you're in a government or a kind of a quasi-governmental entity like a public university, well, there's a rule against that. They've got a rule. Well, they're made to be changed. Legislature meets every year. Well, we can go back over there and change that. But the idea is, and that can be applied to other scenarios. We have applied it to the university. We've applied it into individual programs. The flagship designation programs, the 6 programs that we've designated for that, really are a result of that kind of a thinking. How would you really get ahead? What would the plan be to get ahead? And really map that out. You can do it if it's you want to run a marathon, okay? What's it going to take to get me in shape to run a marathon? How long is that going to take? How am I supposed to have to step that up? But it requires looking further and further ahead. And with that, I think I'll just pull the plug there and just do some questions, because the questions really they're all good, but they're all very, very different. So is that all right, Annabelle? Sure. Okay.
Okay, I know several of you in the Introduction to Leadership class have questions for President Delaney. Can I ask you to come over to this handheld mic?
First one's always the hardest. There we go. Yeah, we got a brave one. And we'll see if we get through the night without the football question.
Well, hello there, President Delaney. My name is Eric Clark, and I am both a dual major in political science and psychology. My question is actually I'm taking a lovely class this semester with Dr. Schwangard called Politics of Harry Potter, and I know of a new professor here, Dr. Cameron, who is teaching some more out-of-the-box classes. And my question to you is, what does university, want to do to attract and promote professors to teach more kind of out-of-the-box classes, more away from just the general, this is your general stats class, this is your general biology. What do you want the university to do to promote ones that are more specific, more out of the box, more that type of thinking.
Yeah. There's somewhat of a misconception about what presidents do in a university. And universities operate under the principle that's known as shared governance, which means I'm really as much a servant to the faculty as the other. It's not a typical corporate sort of an org chart. And so really the faculty hire the faculty within their department. And they're approved ultimately at the provost level, but he never really rejects. I think that we've got some pretty wildly creative faculty in every department, and it's a question of each department developing its own kind of philosophy and political approach. So I think I'd talk to Dr. Schwambaird and say, hey, I like this, can we get more of it? And I think he'll convey that to his colleagues.
I'll certainly do that.
Okay, great, thanks.
Hi, my name is Sam Keys. I'm a senior majoring in communications. My question is a little bit more personal for leadership class.
Sure.
What do you believe some of your greatest personal traits are in leadership? Like trustworthiness, dynamic? What makes you a great leader to say to your president?
Well, I don't know if I'm a great leader or not, but it's, I know, and there's a couple different ways to go with that. I say that leadership, it's akin to management. And in management, what you are doing every day is selecting between a set of options. So what you want to do is to surround yourself with people that will give you a set of options on how to deal with a problem. And if you have people that have the same set of life experiences and background and general philosophy, odds are you're going to get a finite amount of these options. The more diverse that is around you, the more clever and creative, going back to really that last question, the more clever and creative sets of options you'll get. So I've long said that when I look at leaders, more in the political realm, maybe in the university realm than say in business, I think there's sort of 3 steps to that. The first is you need to be able to listen. Well, I won't go down. I was going to say something in politics. I'll leave that one alone. But there are certain people you'll see that are all talk, no listen. You know, you go up, you meet them, they don't want to know what you're thinking. They know the answers, they know what they want to say. So the best part is if you can get people around that you can listen to that can give you a creative solution or an idea or an option. Then the second thing is, that's all great and good, but you got to be a good decider. You got to pick the best one, you got to pick the right one. And then the third is you've got to be able to implement. Just because you've decided it doesn't mean it's going to happen. You've got to have a structure that makes sure that the light bulbs get changed and the grass is cut. You've got to make sure that's all around you. And I've long said that I like making decisions during a crisis for me. I don't get all excited and panicked and worrisome because in a crisis, you've only got a little bit of time to make that decision. So you come up with as many options as you can and you just got to pick the best one. And then I really pretty much don't regret it afterwards because I said, I did the best I could. I didn't have time to really think that out, to bounce this off of other people. When I was mayor of Jacksonville, we had a big Category 5 hurricane that was working its way up the East Coast like a big lawnmower. And if that hurricane had wobbled 50 miles to the west, it wobbled 50 miles to the east. If it had wobbled to the west, the beaches would have been the whole, that island, the intercoastal, across the intercoastal, that would have been under 10 feet of water. Probably UNF would have had some water coming in it. And it really wasn't that hard. It really wasn't that hard. I didn't get much sleep, but other than that, you just kind of make the decisions as best you can. So key is to listen. Really prior to that, really, is to make sure you've got people that are giving you a bunch of options. Now the leadership part, that's kind of a management thing. The leadership part is that utopia thing, dreaming. You got to try to dream what's perfect. What would be perfect, and then how do we get there? Okay, thank you. Good question. Not a great answer, but it's as good as I can come up with.
Hi, President Delaney. I'm Ross Keene. I'm a freshman anthropology major, and I wanted to ask, how does your leadership role here at UNF compare or contrast to your role as mayor of Jacksonville?
Yeah, that's a question I get a lot too. I mentioned just a few minutes ago that universities are structured around what's known as shared governance, and which means that you're required to get the input primarily of the faculty on campus. But also of the employees here before you initiate something. So you try to set up pockets where they get input, where maybe it's a faculty committee that reviews something. You don't always have to follow one of their recommendations, but you've got to listen to them. And if you don't, you're soon to be known as the ex-president. You know, I mean, and so when I came out here, a lot of people are saying, hey, this is really different. I mean, it's different. And it is a different culture. That's a pretty unique thing. That exists in law firms, engineering firms, some medical firms have the same kind of a structure where it's really the practitioners, it's their entity. Maybe they'll hire kind of a manager to run the office, but a university will hire a president. But in many ways, my secretary has been with me since 1985. This is kind of my third career, and she's been on each step. She's really a part of the family now. And she says, you know, they say it's different, but it's really not all that different because a budget's a budget, an org chart's an org chart. And when I was in City Hall, similarly, you just don't make a pronouncement there and it happens. You've got to kind of bring the public along, and then you've got to bring your co-equal branch of government, a city council or the state legislature or Congress. You just don't, it doesn't just happen because you want it to happen. So you've got to work kind of collaboratively to make that happen. And hopefully we do, you know, we've got a lot to try to make sure we do that. Sometimes we come up with some things that we probably didn't consult as much on. For example, this wasn't a big concern among some faculty, but we made a decision to do mandatory freshman housing next fall. And we'd worked with the head of the faculty association, we discussed it there, but we really didn't kind of work to get it more broadly disseminated. And here's the reason we did that. That's actually one of the questions that was handed in, but it's an example of where I didn't do it right. But we took 3 years in a row and we studied the success of people who lived here their freshman year versus those that didn't, going back 4, 5, 6 years. And there was a 25 to 30% higher graduation rate if you lived on campus. And after seeing that 3 years in a row, I said, you know, that's pretty simple. And really what it is I think the students bond with the campus, they make friends, they join a club, they get implanted and bonded here. And that's why we've made a big focus on student life and student activities this year, while you've seen a lot more concerts and those kinds of things, because we want to kind of get people saying, hey, this is a place I want to go to, it's a place I also want to graduate from. Okay, thanks.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, my name is John Kwai, and I'm biology major, senior. And consider you, Mr. Delaney, as mentor. I really admire your Jacksonville plan. And I'm taking an intro to leadership right now. And we learned last month about the leaders, the definition of a leader, and what characteristics a leader has. So I was curious if you can sum up your philosophy of leadership in 2 words. What are those words?
2 words?
Yeah.
Ooh. That's hard. Yeah. I can do 3. Listen, decide, implement. Kind of what I said before. I mean, I think that's as close as I could get. But that's fun. I'll have to think so I can get that down to 2. Yeah. Somebody here will find a way. Some journalism student will help me here. Communications. Yeah.
Matthew Richardson. I'm a senior in communication. Thank you for this opportunity this evening to ask you these questions. It's recently come to my attention that during commencement ceremony of graduation, leadership recipients are recognized. Why did you decide to include this as part of the ceremony?
Mauricio, that came from you, I think, didn't it? Was somebody in your... It came from Willie, trustee. It came from a trustee on the board of, we had a trustee named Willie Gonzalez who just rotated off. And he made that suggestion that as part of the graduation ceremony, our board is really big into this program. And the chair of our board is a former Naval Academy grad. He's an engineer. He's got a PhD in engineering, actually, and runs a firm here in town. And so going to the military academy, he's about integrity, honor, duty, country, and he's sort of there. And it's a little more difficult to impose that in a public university like this, but Mauricio kind of came up with this idea of this entity that Bruce Taylor really, really liked. And so our board is intrigued by it. They get updates on it. So they came up with the idea, you know what, if it's that important to us, then along with those that we give a diploma, we ought to recognize those that have gone through the program, kind of received the training. And it's gone over well. It's gone over well. Thank you.
My name is Harley. I'm a freshman here, and I'm actually a secondary education major for the social studies. And education is a field in which nothing is ideal. Every day is a new challenge, and it's quite demoralizing at some points. So my question for you is, as someone who's had such a leadership role where things aren't always ideal and everything is a new challenge, how do you get through something like that? Do you have an inspirational quote or?
That's a good question. I'd make this too personal, but I do find praying is an outlet for me. I think really maybe the better approach is to try to find a way to fix it. What I have found lacking in the legislative debate over kindergarten through 12th, primary and secondary education, is the coalescence behind utopia, a plan to fix it. What would it take? How many teachers? How big should the classrooms be? What should we pay teachers? And as a result, we've got people that don't really know what they're talking about, trying to develop a plan without appropriate listening and input from the teachers and the administrators of the school system. So mostly I try to get it fixed. Find a way to fix it. Try to own that problem and come up with a solution. Because you're talking more about the systemic problems with the school system. Is that what you're?
I mean, like on a day-to-day basis as a teacher, like it will be a challenge.
Oh, if it was me teaching a classroom of second graders, I think suicide would be a consideration. I really admire, and that you've really got to have. One of our best friends at the beach that I actually introduced the wife to my college roommate. She's a school teacher, and there's just a certain personality, that can deal with that and do that. And I admire those going into education, and we don't pay that field enough. Xanax, something, I don't know. It's thanks. Good luck.
Thank you for coming tonight, President Delaney. I am Keith Andes, a senior in business management, and I'm in the Introduction to Leadership course as well. One of the things that we've been covering is the concept of leadership as a learned trait. And within that means I was curious if you've had any obstacles in your life as far as learning to become a leader that you think was difficult for you to overcome.
That was actually one of the questions. There's a couple on here. I said, I hope they don't ask that verbally, because I don't have there's been a couple already that I wished hadn't been asked, but it's just kidding on that. I think your instructors are going to be better at this than me. My instinct and assumption had been that, for the most part, leaders are pretty innate, that you kind of are born with it. They've got some sort of instinct. But over the last few years, I've seen two things. One, there's very many different styles that have been successful leaders. And so there isn't just one cookie cutter size. And so what I've kind of come to the conclusion that we all need to do is to be as self-aware of ourselves as we can. Have people that'll tell you, hey, you're making a mistake here, don't do that one again, don't use that line in the speech, and to really work on a weakness. I've got a friend that unsuccessfully ran for public office recently, but I saw huge growth in him, even in his speaking style and in his thinking and how he interacted with people, and so it's really kind of to work always on that self-improvement. I always second guess myself. I see these people that are just so confident, and they just they just go out there, and I'm always the next day, God, you think I was right? Is there a better way to have done that? So I think kind of focusing on those things, and then ultimately I think the premise that there are, I think, leadership fundamentals that can be taught. There's engineers that really just want to draw, that can lead their companies or their businesses if they get, have developed certain skills. So I do think that can be done. Well, good luck.
Hey, thank you.
Thanks, okay.
Hello, my name is Krupa Patel. I'm a biology major, and my question is that where do you see UNF by 2015? Will there be additional buildings being built? And with those additional buildings, will there be additional parking spaces for students?
Parking and football always comes up. It's when I was first appointed president of UNF, a friend of mine had a friend who'd been president at Clemson and at Alabama. He'd been provost down at the University of Florida. And he had a book that's called The Art of Being a University President. And so this mutual friend gave it to me. And basically it's about 10 or 15 chapters that are little things he's written or speeches he's given that they've written down. And one of them was, he styled it as a top 10 Letterman list, you know. And number one on the list was this: do not delude yourself into thinking you can solve the campus parking problem, which I have not deluded myself into thinking. Number two was hope you like chicken, because you eat dinners a lot. But right now we're in a very unusual situation. When I got here, we had about 2.9 million square feet of business, of offices, classes, etc. We tore down a building that had mold that I'm going to say had 50,000 square feet. And then we had a lot of classes and even offices that were in portables. You know, that whole space of the student union, really right between here and the garage, was a whole bank of portables, double wides, and, you know, very unprofessional. So I made the vow that I wanted to get rid of those damn portables, because I just didn't think that's the way we should house faculty members, classes, etc. And it became just I want to get rid of those. And I think we're down to the last one, I think two, and one of those goes in the next couple months. And at the time, we were growing pretty rapidly. And I remember, who's not my chief of staff, he says, John, do you think you'll ever have enough bricks and mortar? Will you ever be able to build that much ahead? And I said, well, we've got to. I mean, we've really got to. And UNF had really been not getting its fair share of the construction dollars for the state. And so since then, remember that 2.9 million square feet, and then subtract something from it with the portables and the building we tore down. Since then, we've added 1.6 to 1.7 million square feet. So 35 to 40% of the buildings on campus are basically new. I mean, they're basically within the last 8 years since I've been here. So we were getting our share. We got more than our share of the construction dollars. We found very creative ways to finance this building. Student government has contributed in a lot of different ways to find ways to build a fitness center, and also this building, the new fitness center. So that part's going. But the bulk of our construction dollars come from the state in what are known as PICO dollars. Public something, I don't even know what that stands for, but it has to do with an internet tax and this kind of a deal. And basically that's disappeared. So the 3 buildings that we got going under construction now, really I guess 2, because we finished the annex to the College of Ed. The fitness center should open in a couple of months, and the biology building, I think is now. I think people are moving in it now. That's probably it for the next couple of years. And so as to growth, what we really did in the fall of 2008, when the state cut our budget, we rolled back 1,000 students. We actually shrunk for the first time in our history, and we've essentially frozen since then. I hope nobody had brought a gun in here, because they may not like this next comment, but we have more parking spaces per student than any university in the state. And there's always spaces in the northern lot and over at UNF Hall, but you got to shuttle in. And unfortunately, when you go to a university, if you go to a little small college, different story, but when you go to a university, it's not going to be like we can pull up to a gate station and take 2 steps and hop in to get a Coke, you know? It's just not going to work. And so it's going to require a little bit of walking. And my kids that have gone here, I tell them, buy the cheap pass, park in the northern lot or AOL, and shuttle in. It's just not worth driving around trying to find a space. You're just going to blow it and get frustrated. So they all bought the cheap passes and parked out. Did I cover everything you wanted on that? Okay, great, thanks.
Hi, my name is Georgia Compton, and I'm a sophomore here at UNF, and I'm a public relations major, and I was wondering, I actually have 2 questions. I was wondering, first off, who are some of your mentors and who you look up to that have leadership roles? And second, what were your goals for UNF for 2012?
Okay. Yeah, I'm a lawyer, and I got out of law school. I hated law school. And I was a year in, and it was just too late to drop out. I didn't do great in it until my last half of law school, then I did pretty well. But I fell in love with the courtroom. And so my first job was as an assistant state attorney, a prosecutor here in town. And the then longtime serving state attorney was a guy named Ed Austin, who just passed away last April, over the Easter weekend. And next to my parents, the guy that had the most influence on my life was Ed. And he was, interestingly, he's the same age, I'm the same age now that he was when I met him. But he sure seemed a lot wiser and older and grayer than me. But And so I'm going too long on that, but he really had a lot of lessons, and a lot of us that work for him, we have what we call Edisms. There's little sayings that we kind of conjure up in decision making. But what I learned from that is it's always healthy when you go into a new place to pick up a mentor. Sometimes they'll call it a rabbi, a teacher, somebody that can kind of help, that you connect with, that can kind of help, that's been there before and kind of show you some of those things. So Ed, if you Google him, he's a really phenomenal leader. He was an incredible guy, just an incredible guy. And the second part of your question?
What were some of your goals for UNF for this year?
For this year. The state has cut our budget about 12%, and that's including the increased tuition that you're paying. And our overriding theme was really twofold. One, we didn't want students to feel the impact of those budget cuts. So we didn't want to cut classes or have where you can't get in the classes. I know that's still a little awkward. Summer school's a little bit hard. And the second thing is that we looked at the departments that we had, and we looked at the faculty we had and the staff we had, and we said we like them. We don't want to lay any of these people off. Now that doesn't mean that we don't occasionally have to fire somebody for doing something wrong, but and we do that, or if their performance is bad. But to go in and say you're going to lose your job because we're just short of money. So we're one of only 2 universities that has not laid off faculty members. Florida State, I don't know how many faculty they had, but they laid off at least 120 faculty members, and a good slug of those were tenured. Florida, I think a bigger number. And so a lot of these places, it's horrifying. So the big thing, and we're looking like we're going to get cut again, and it may be a big number too. So the big thing we're focused on is the finances. I would love to focus more on more flagshipping programs. I spend a good bit of our time raising money and lobbying the legislature, but it's really trying to make sure that you can get the classes you want, that we keep the faculty that you're working with that you like, that the lights are on, the air conditioning's on, all those kind of things.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, President Delaney. I'm a senior public health major here at the university. My question is a little difficult to put in words, I guess, but big fan of the Spinnaker. Been reading it for several years now. And there's been several articles about Governor Scott lately and some of the legislation he's been pushing for and passing. There's something in there about how he supports legislation that would take the choice away from students to choose their student representative for the Board of Governors. Right now it's supposed to be the student body president, I think, Brockman. Yeah. And I personally like Brockman. I didn't vote for him personally, but the student body voted for him. He represents us as a whole, and I just wanted to get your idea on how you feel about I'm in the leadership class too. This sort of authoritarian leadership style where someone's choosing over the students who best represents them.
Yeah. The version I heard of was that what he number one, it's not Governor Scott. There's a state senator that wants the governor to make the appointment to the Board of Governors of the student representative, not at the local university. Is that right, Matt? Yeah. So, that we were regulated by a state Board of Governors. They've delegated a lot of authority to our local boards of trustees, of which Matt sits as president of the student body. And then those presidents have an association, and they select one of their members to sit on the state Board of Governors. What's happened is, and this happens every couple of years, one of the universities doesn't want to be a member of the association, so they drop out. And that means that they don't really get a vote in who serves on the Board of Governors. So Florida State does not want to be a member of the association, and this senator represents an area near Florida State, so he's filing that bill to kind of take that away and allow the governor then to select. I don't even know if the governor's weighed in on that or not, but there was a lot of debate for years over how healthy it was to have a faculty member on the Board of Governors and the Board of Trustees and a student member on the Board of Trustees and on the state board. And I think virtually every president would tell you that it's worked out well. You've got a faculty voice. The board listens to the faculty member when they make observations, and I think Matt would tell you they clearly listen to the students. They want to know. They don't always necessarily agree with the position of either one, but they clearly get a voice on those boards. So I don't think it's going to pass. So
Thank you.
I probably spent too much time answering that question, but
Hi, good evening.
One more.
One more, okay.
One more question.
Can you do them real quick, and maybe we can get all three?
Okay. Hi, my name is Erin Ostrowski, Public Relations Senior. I was just wondering who's your favorite past president and why. It was a fun question.
Okay, yeah.
That's all.
I'm kind of a student of presidents because I look to those. There's a lot to learn about their leadership style and their management skills, and so there's a number of them that I like. I thought President Reagan did a terrific job. I think a much maligned president that should get more credit is Lyndon Johnson. Each of those you may have political views on, but what I admired about Lyndon Johnson was that he did that implementing. He got done what his agenda was because he had come from the Congress, so he would just ram it through. Truman was clever, Franklin Roosevelt. I didn't think as much of Teddy Roosevelt as a lot of other people do, and then I think Lincoln, I just love reading about Lincoln, just love his speeches and his letters and his jokes. So that'd be my top 5 or 6. Yeah, thanks, appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Aya Jawi, freshman biology major. I was actually wondering if you were looking to expand study abroad programs. I know you got the TLO and all these flagship programs, and there aren't that many opportunities available for us right now.
Yep. Questions about expanding the study abroad programs? Yes, that's something we would like to really drive up. We're at what, Mauricio, percent or number? I forget what we're. Yeah, we want to be among the top 10% in the country of our students that study abroad. And we realize to do that we've got to get more of a stipend to allow you to do that. And I described, Mauricio sent a lunch up, Dr. Gonzalez, when I was here my first year, and with students that had studied abroad, and I said, it was like, as they described their experiences, said their eyes had changed. You know, I mean, we had the examples I give, we had nurses that had delivered babies in Africa. And you know, how many nursing students do we have? How many nursing students? If you've delivered a baby on your own in the United States, something went wrong, didn't it? You know, I mean, so it's a great experience there. Teachers that have taught down in Belize, basically, and you know, just unair-conditioned buildings. It's yes, we want to drive that. We want to be among the tops in the country on that. Okay.
I'm Allison, and I'm a junior. I'm a political science major. And I am just concerned about the political discourse in our country right now when it comes to solving very important issues that we're all facing, issues that are going to impact all of us, you know, when decisions are made. And I was wondering if you feel like there's a leadership role you can take when it comes to us and teaching us how to partake in better political discourse than what's going on in Washington and all over the country.
Yeah, it's bad. There's no question of that. And at other times, it's always been bad to some extent. I mean, you go back to when President Jefferson was president. I mean, it was horrific what went on back then. And at some point, the people have to say enough. You know, and one of the problems is negative ads work. You know, and so I had a rule when I was in office that in running for office that if I was going to say or do anything negative of an opponent, it had to be on an issue. It couldn't be personal, and it had to be true. And if you stick with that, because you're going to disagree, and you're allowed to draw sharp lines, but if you're not personal, if it's true, and you're not twisting and exaggerating, and I'll close with this on how successful I got with that one. And my race was pretty ugly too. I can laugh at it because I won, but you know. But at the end, one of the last debates, Channel 4 did a debate, and what they did on this debate is you were allowed to play one of your opponent's ads and just cut it to shreds. You know, you were allowed to do that. And our ads, we had been so precise, etc. On our ad, he couldn't do one. So he did one of my positive ads about me and cut it to shreds. No, he didn't play the game. And so, and the last thing I'll end on is this, is that I actually am concerned about it on campuses, not just in the political debate, but in our bureaucracy, budget things, et cetera. I think there's a lot of unhealthiness here. And so I've met with the head of the Faculty Association, and just yesterday again with the head of the union, the faculty union, to create, we're going to start a civility committee. And I'd like them to do a couple things. One is to kind of do a baseline of how satisfied are you, how are you with your colleagues in the department, with your supervisors, do you feel that you can say what you're worried about and concerned with? Do we need to set up a hotline so people can do that anonymously and protected? And then C, can we kind of have, and maybe even bring some people in that when the tensions start to rise, that somebody comes in and tries to facilitate and cool this off. And because it's an issue. Someday the public will get fed up with it, and it's usually when somebody exaggerates or does it too much, and the public will have it. But the problem is it sure works to driving down somebody's poll numbers, which is why people do it. Okay, and I know I just dragged it on, but they were standing over there. I didn't want to cut them loose. Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. Thanks. Thanks.